Wondering myself. Good evening. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending. I'm Lisa Frazier. I am the interim town manager. Welcome. This evening, we're talking about our vulnerability assessment. We did one back in 2019. Statutory requirements changed, so we're updating them now. It was my pleasure to receive a phone call from Dr. Lisa Soto stating that they had a grant and that they were going to do it for us for free. Operative word here in Melbourne Beach. So we're very, very excited to hear their presentation this evening, and I'll let Dr. Soto take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
I'm sorry, a little housekeeping. We have a meeting at 7, so we have a hard stop at 5 to 7, okay? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. It's much more interesting for us to have an audience. I'm going to turn this over to Kelsey Mack, who's with our office, who's an environmental scientist with us, who's also pursuing her Association of Certified Planners. So she's more of an environmental planner, to talk about the actual vulnerability assessment process and the data acquisition and how we do it and all that stuff. I just really wanted to share with you a little bit of the history of the project, and thank you for being here. This is an iterative process. So we're going to be updating a vulnerability assessment that's already been done with more extended flood scenario dates. So we recognize that changes are happening on the planet, and we need to plan for them. And we're fortunate that so many cities, towns, and counties are doing that, and that the state of Florida is divvying out the money for it to get done. So once these planning grants are finished and the state agency checks the box, when we submit this vulnerability assessment and all of this data to the state and they approve it, then the town is eligible for the money, the grant money, to do the projects also. So that's why it's important that these planning grants get finished and that box gets checked, because there are potential funding coming, big, huge dollars. These are little dollars, these are small grants, but the tens of millions of dollars that are needed to really make the changes, you'll be eligible for that as well. So when we started this process with the county, the state realized that there were 8 towns and cities that didn't have it done yet. And this was one of them. They need to be updated with the new regs, like Lisa described. You had done it before, but then they changed the regulations, and so now you have an opportunity to update it. So I'm going to, with that, kind of give you a little bit of the history and why we're here and how we came to this point. Turn it over to Kelsey. Kelsey is an environmental scientist with us. She's got, degrees in scientific stuff, but she's pursuing a planning certification, and she's got experience working in the city of Cocoa Beach as their sustainability coordinator, and she's been working with us. I think we're working on, this is our 11th vulnerability assessment, and so she's been through this process with us several times. So I'm going to turn it over to her and let her introduce it now. Thank you, Kelsey. Let's give her a round.
All right, good evening, everybody, and thank you again for being here. Like Lisa said, and Lisa said before, it's really important to have the community involved in this planning process. And I'll share a little secret with you. I'm a Melbourne Beach resident as well, so it's really exciting for me to be here to talk to my own community today. So thank you all for being here. So a vulnerability assessment, that's kind of an odd term, but basically what we're doing here is we are identifying risks and planning for the future when it comes to impacts from climate change and storm-related impacts. So what we're going to be looking at is, first off, why is this even important to our community? Why is Melbourne Beach subject to these changes? So we're going to be looking at current and future risks, which include things like flooding and maybe even erosion that is caused by flooding, like you see in the photo there. I think that's from south, beyond the town limits, but still very near and dear to our community here and can impact us. We also will be looking at the end of this process, helping the town to prioritize capital improvement projects for things like wastewater, stormwater, structural hardening, and specifically wastewater and stormwater also kind of double dip into the water quality category, so helping the Indian River Lagoon as well. And then, as we mentioned before, this will make the town eligible to receive FDEP, Resilient Florida Implementation Grant funding, which again is required by Florida statute to complete this vulnerability assessment before the town's eligible to apply for that money. And just to give you a few examples of where that money has gone locally in other municipalities that have applied for that funding, Satellite Beach got a $5 million grant to make some improvements to their emergency facilities. Cape Canaveral got over $400,000 for stormwater improvements, and Titusville got a $2 million water or wastewater improvement grant through that program. So we're talking big dollars here that the town can really capitalize on if their projects are selected, and this is the first step in the process in setting the stage for that. So let's talk about why Melbourne Beach is at risk to climate change in general. So number one, we are surrounded by water. We have the Atlantic Ocean, we have the Indian River Lagoon, we also have groundwater beneath the surface. And next, we have elevation that we need to consider. So here you're looking at a digital elevation model of the town. The Atlantic Ocean is on the right side of the screen. The Indian River Lagoon is here on the left side of the screen. The higher elevations are in red, and as you'll notice, those are closer to the dune, and as we slope further and further west towards the Indian River Lagoon, that elevation drops. So we're looking here at a top profile. We're going to be looking, pay attention where Ocean Avenue is. We're going to switch to a side profile of Ocean Avenue to give you a perspective here. So a little cross section of Ocean Avenue. So you see the surfer up on the dune. It'll slope down towards the Atlantic Ocean, but as we're looking at where the town landmass is, it really slopes towards the Indian River Lagoon, with those maximum elevations being maybe around 18 feet on average above zero, which is near sea level, and then sloping down to about 4 to 5 feet above sea level when we get towards Riverside Drive. And why is this important? Well, water flows downhill. So we usually have water collecting in these lower lying areas. And then another key thing here, and I'm sure many of us have noticed, storage is an issue here as well. So when we think about storage of the water underneath the ground, there's going to be more space for that storage to occur closer to the dunes where the elevation is higher versus where the Indian River Lagoon, where it slopes down towards the lagoon. So those are some things that we'll be considering here in this project as well. So as you might imagine, some areas or some assets and things in the low-lying areas will be more exposed to sea level rise and some of the changes we may see coming forward. So preparing for inevitable change. These changes, we're already seeing them happening. We're going to be looking here at sea level rise, storm surge, and increasing rainfall as part of this vulnerability assessment. So we know we're susceptible, so we really need to prepare for these changes. So we're going to start talking about sea level rise. And today we've brought a couple of charts to share with you guys. So what you're looking at here is the mean or annual mean sea levels along Florida's Atlantic coast. So this is from the NOAA tidal station at Trident Pier, which is at Cape Canaveral or up at Port Canaveral. And you can see from 1940 to, just about a year or so ago, the trend line is going up. So the trend line is the dashed line where you see fluctuations annually. The trend is really going up, and we've seen an average of about 7.5 inches of rise over that time. So it's happening, it's real, that's the Atlantic Ocean, but we also have the lagoon to consider. And the lagoon tends to behave a little bit differently. So here we've pulled a couple of different USGS stations from the Indian River Lagoon system and watershed. So we've highlighted here at the bottom, Haliver Canal, we've seen a mean increase in about 6.1 inches, and then you can see also other stations such as Wabasso and the St. Lucie Estuary, we're also seeing those increases as well. And as many of us know, the ocean, we see those tidal changes and fluctuations occur daily, whereas in the Indian River Lagoon, it's usually driven by seasonal events or rain events or more specific events, and those water levels tend to fluctuate more slowly, not necessarily daily, but with those seasonal changes. So we also have storm events that are affecting our community. One of the most prominent issues with storm events is storm surge. So storm surge is when the wind from the tremendous fetch just pushes all of the water up onto the land surface, and this is actually one of the most costly and deadly impacts from storms. So we see flooding happening inland, and we also see it upstream. So this can happen from the Atlantic Ocean, but also from the lagoon. For example, Hurricane Dorian, and I think it was 2019, caused catastrophic flooding on some of the Outer Banks, and most of that storm surge came from the Pamlico Sound, which is behind those islands. So it can really happen. Although that sound is much larger than the Indian River Lagoon, we still can be kind of subject to impacts from all sides. We also see sand loss from our beaches. As that photo shows here, I took that picture on the right after Hurricane Nicole, so only a Category 1 storm, but we're really seeing those impacts can really even happen with those lower category storms. And then the physical pressures of that water can also move our infrastructure and cause damage, as we've all seen catastrophic damage in places like Fort Myers over the past couple of years. So that's storm surge. We also need to talk about rainfall. We have water in the Atlantic Ocean and the lagoon, but it also falls from the sky, and we need to take that water into account as well. So climate scientists tell us that rainfall timing and intensity is expected to change. So what's going to happen is we may see fewer rain events, but the events that we do see will bring more rain all at once. So the town of Melbourne Beach, we have this chart here, and you see the 24-hour storm intervals. So those are some common intervals that are typically considered in engineering and stormwater modeling. And then we've shown the percent occurrence of that storm happening in a given year. So a lot of people consider 10-year storms or 100-year storms or 500-year storms. And what that means is that that particular storm has, for example, a 10% chance of occurring in any given year. So currently, the town of Melbourne Beach in its code requires modeling of or retention of the first 8 inches of runoff from a 10-year, 24-hour storm. So you see that shown here. So 10-year, 24-hour storm has about a 10% chance of happening every year, and we're expected, based on NOAA's predictions, to receive 7.46 inches of rainfall in depth. So if we're modeling for 8 inches, well, we're exceeding that. But if these storm events become more severe and we're seeing more rain at once, we may need to consider accounting for greater rainfall depths, which is what this vulnerability assessment may reveal in the end. So as part of the vulnerability assessment, state statute and DEP are requiring us to model 100-year and 500-year storms. So again, these storms have about a 1% and a 0.2% chance of happening every year, but those percentages may continue to increase as these storm events become more regular. And that does seem like a lot of rain, but to put this into perspective, the city of Titusville, whose rainfall predicted depths are very similar to this, they received 13 inches just last weekend. So these events are happening, they're happening now, and we need to start planning for them and recognizing them now. So moving along to DEP's process and what they're requiring for adaptation planning throughout the state. So they kind of break things off into 4 different sections. So number 1 and number 2 is what we're going to be focusing on here with this VA in our work with the town. Number 1, we're establishing that context. So we're really getting town staff on board. The town has identified their internal team to help kind of tackle some of these issues and identify the assets that we're going to talk about here shortly. Also, it's part of completing public outreach, which you guys are all a part of, so thank you for being part of that process. And then we'll get into number 2 here in just a moment. We'll talk about the asset inventory that we've completed for the town, and then we will be completing an exposure and sensitivity analysis, and I'll explain what that is here in a bit. The next couple of planning areas are things that usually happen after the vulnerability assessment process, and these involve the town or the local government including some of these priorities in their capital improvement project planning or in their budgeting, identifying grants, seeking those grants, and those types of activities typically happen after this process. So here we are with the vulnerability assessment again. As we mentioned, it's funding through DEP, so yay, it's free for the town, and it's also part of this larger collaborative effort throughout the entire county. So what's really exciting about this is a lot of times, cities and counties kind of do things independently, but with this being a collaborative effort, we can all identify those flooding risks and have equal comparisons to maybe be more competitive in our grant proposals as we move forward. So again, assessing the risks that the town will see from climate change, from things such as sea level rise, storm surge, and then increasing rainfall that we mentioned before. We've already identified critical assets within the town, which we're going to get into on the next slide. And then we'll evaluate various flooding scenarios from sea level rise, storm surge, and that rainfall that we mentioned. And again, the end goal is to prioritize and focus adaptation strategies in the future as the town moves on in their planning process. So, critical asset inventory is one of the main steps in the VA vulnerability assessment process, and these critical assets are grouped into 4 main categories that you see here, and these are defined in state statute. So we'll get into what these are on the next slide, but basically transportation and evacuation assets, I'm sure you can guess what those are. Those are your roads, your evacuation routes, critical infrastructure, community and emergency facilities, and also those cultural and natural assets also provide benefits as well. So transportation and evacuation routes. What you see here on the bulleted dots on the screen are what's required by state statute. Not every town or every city has all of these. Melbourne Beach does not have an airport or railroads or those things, but these are things that as planners we have to just evaluate and check the box and say yes we have them or no we don't have them. So for example, here in Melbourne Beach, the only transportation asset that is here are the roads and the evacuation route, which is A1A. Next, we have that critical infrastructure. So that covers things like the stormwater assets in the town. So you see those super tiny here on the screen. There's a lot of them here, but these cover things like the stormwater inlets, the outfalls to the lagoon, the swales along the sides of the road. So we want to see how impacted these are going to be by rising waters or increasing rainfall. We also have wastewater infrastructure here within the town. So there's a lot of it here. It's pretty well connected throughout the town. I think there's just a few properties that are not connected, but this wastewater, again, is managed and really maintained by Brevard County, but it's a great opportunity for the town and the county to, prioritize this because these are services that they provide services to the residents, so the town is interested in considering the wastewater assets as well. And then a couple of other critical infrastructure assets that the town has includes disaster debris management sites. So that's when we have a huge storm, that's where all of the debris needs to go. We need a place to have that. We need to make sure it's also not flooded in the event that we need to perform cleanup duties. Communications facilities, I believe that's the post office. And then we also have the utility services, which includes the Exxon gas station. That's critical to the town's operation. Although it is a privately owned business, it still provides a critical linkage for the town. Moving on to community and emergency facilities, these are things like fire stations and police stations, which we do have here. It also includes community centers, like you guys are positioned in right now. In addition to the church that I'm sure many of you voted at yesterday, that is considered a community center. This also incorporates our schools. So again, Melbourne Beach doesn't have all of these things, but they do have many of these things that'll be included in the vulnerability assessment. And then lastly, those cultural and natural resources, these are things such as the old post office or the Rickman House that, these are important to the community, they're important to the town's culture and heritage, and we want to make sure that if there's a risk, that it's identified so the town can respond and plan appropriately. This also includes things like the dune crossovers that the town maintains. They manage them, they build new ones, they want to know if something may happen to them, as well as the parks. The Melbourne Beach Pier, those types of things are also included here in this vulnerability assessment. So just to provide a quick summary of those critical assets, we've listed some of the key categories here. These are not every single category that's included, but you'll notice there's quite a few stormwater infrastructure assets, there's quite a few wastewater assets, and that brings us to a total of about 1,277 total critical assets that the town has some type of concern with that we're going to be evaluating as part of this assessment. So that seems like a lot of assets for a town with only 3,000 residents. So we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of prioritization, but it'll be great information in the end. And so one thing that you will notice here, and I'm sure you noticed it on another slide as well, is that potable water was not included as part of this analysis, and that is because sometimes those towns that provide that service, that the data is sensitive, so they're not willing to share that. But a lot of times those organizations are completing their own vulnerability assessment planning to deal with any issues that may come about. Also, as part of this, there's nothing preventing the process from moving to the next step. So the next step in the process involves all the fun stuff, which is the modeling, flood exposure, and sensitivity. So in 2019, as Lisa mentioned before, the town completed a vulnerability assessment, and they looked at some different scenarios. So they looked at the years 2040 and 2070. State statute in 2024 updated the requirement to be 2050 and 2080. So that's what we're going to be looking at here as part of this vulnerability assessment. We'll also be looking at the 100-year and the 500-year 24-hour storm that we talked about with that rainfall a little bit earlier in the presentation. And when we say sensitivity and exposure, I know that can be a little bit like, what does that actually mean? So exposure means, is the asset going to be touched by water, by any type of flood water or storm surge? And then sensitivity really paints that picture of, well, how deep is that water going to be? Is it going to be 1 foot? Is it going to be 6 inches? And that may help with some planning in the future as well. So some example photos from around town. I'm sure many of you voted at the church yesterday. That was from a couple of weeks ago, although the building didn't flood. That parking lot area was very flooded, so the town would want to know or the church probably would also want to know if that asset was going to be exposed or sensitive to floodwaters in the future that may disrupt voting activities, for example, that services the residents. Some assets, like stormwater swales, we expect to flood because we design it to make the water go there. So that's great that the water's there, but we want to make sure that the structures are able to handle the volume of water with these intense rain events, so that this will also kind of paint that picture as well. And then moving right along to those modeling scenarios, we've kind of mentioned these a little bit already. So we'll be looking at coastal and tidal flooding, storm surge flooding, and then that rainfall-induced flooding. We'll be looking at the current year as well as 2050 and 2080, and then sea level rise projections. I'm sure we've all kind of heard that buzz term going around. We'll be looking at the intermediate low and the intermediate, which are required by state statute and DEP. So those are what we're going to be doing. And in the end, what this model does is it takes into consideration things like elevation and topography, that rising water level, impervious surfaces that where the water can't percolate through, as well as storm surge and precipitation, stacks everything on top and assigns a risk to all of these assets in the end of this entire thing. So again, we have to prepare for the future. Change is coming. Change is already here. It's inevitable. It's going to keep happening. So this project and this vulnerability assessment really seeks to assign risks to each of those critical assets, help the town prioritize areas where climate adaptation strategies are necessary, and plan for those capital improvements, as well as seeking that DEP grant funding that the town would be eligible to apply for after this, and then reduce the current and future flooding impacts throughout the town, which I'm sure many of us have seen those, and we have some photos here of some of those impacts as well. And I do want to point out the photo on the kind of top left. That's one of the stormwater inlets, and what's going on there is there's water coming up the inlet because the lagoon level is just so high. So this is on the western side of the town, so remember we talked about it's a lower elevation, so that can happen too. It may not be coming over our seawalls or over the land surface, but it's coming up the pipes because we can't make the lagoon level magically go down. We'll have to wait until it drops naturally. So those are things that'll be considered moving forward in the planning process as well, I'm sure, for the town. Okay, and with that, that was just a snapshot of the work we're going to be performing, and we'll share. There'll be a final report that'll be delivered to the town that I'm sure we may be back to present on. If not, I'm sure it'll be made available to you. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And I think we have some time for questions. Lisa, do you want them to come to the podium?
If they would so desire to come up to the podium, that might be a good idea. We're not going to have minutes, but it is being recorded. So.
I just wanted to know when you expected to have this completed.
When we expect to have it completed? Yeah, so the project timeline, it's a very tight timeline because of the DEP requirements. So the full project will be completed, I believe it's August of next year.
The report should be done by the end of June.
Yeah, the final report should be done by the end of June, but the grant ends in August, so there may be some additional public engagement after that. And what's really exciting about that timeline is the Resilient Florida grant funding opens around August, September, so the town may be eligible for the next cycle of money that comes about.
Hello. Hello, Lisa. The last one was done in 2019, you said? And how often was it supposed to be done? You said it wasn't done for some reason, and why not?
Yeah, so the one in 2019 was, I believe, completed in coordination with the Town Sustainability Committee and the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and that report at that time met the statutory requirements, but in 2024, the state updated those requirements and said you need to update your vulnerability assessments to match these requirements in order to be eligible for the funding. So that is why this is being updated.
But I mean, could it have been done a couple of years ago?
So the opportunity right now came about because Brevard County facilitated this grant for the town. So that's why it's going on right now.
But that wasn't my question. My question was, wasn't it supposed to have been, could it have been done a couple of years ago to be eligible for the grant?
Maybe I could help answer that. I wasn't here, so
Sure,
forgive
sure.
me, but since I've done them in other areas, yes, this could have made the town eligible for these grants, yes. Whether they're going to be eligible is a question. Once we determine what assets are really vulnerable. When Kelsey was talking about all these grants in Cocoa Beach, I know Satellite Beach, they actually determined that their fire station was vulnerable and was in a very vulnerable area. I think it was at risk of being flooded at some point. So they went and chose another site and raised it up and built another one. And that grant helped pay for that. So assets are defined, like is shown on these PowerPoints as, again, your stormwater pipes. I'm not even sure if they'd pay for new stormwater pipes and inlets. That's questionable to me. But definitely our buildings, our dune crossovers possibly, seawalls, things of that nature. So could we have gone after it before? Maybe, possibly.
Well, how often should a vulnerability assessment be done?
Well, this wouldn't have had to have been redone, except that DEP then changed the criteria. And so now it's the timeline has been extended, so now it's 2080, is that what you said?
The modeling will be 2050 and 2080 sea level rise projections.
Correct, so they're asking everybody to update it and show those projections. But it's not like, I do not believe the Florida statute, like comprehensive plans, have to be revised every 7 to 10 years. I don't believe, it does not state the timeline.
So it doesn't tell you how often it should be done? Just-
Correct, when they change the criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help answer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So like, he's thinking it's like a comp plan that needs to be updated regularly. The comp plan.
For the vulnerability assessment? Yeah, there's a section in Reddit. Okay, well, we'll have to follow up on that then.
My question was gonna be, what if the other consequences other than when you're behind, you may not be fined, but you're just not eligible for grants?
Yeah, so I don't think that this is 100% required that each town complete this. Right, this is really for the benefit of the town, so that the town knows what they may need to expect in the future. And then the incentive is it makes them eligible for this funding that, to, make improvements based on the findings of the assessment.
So my understanding is this is being done to be able to apply for grant money. If that grant money is awarded, is that specifically for assets to around those assets, or like residential stormwater? Like what specifically is that grant money have to be used for, like criteria?
So typically with grant funding, it's when you submit a grant application, it's for a very specific project. So the town would identify a project, usually in their capital improvement plan or their stormwater master plan, that would then be submitted as a specific project to DEP. And DEP would decide, do we want to fund this, yes or no? Do we have the funding to allocate to this, yes or no? Does that answer your question?
Yes, but in addition is like for a project, are they typically geared toward critical assets to like a church parking lot, for example, or are projects like we have 2 blocks residential and we have severe stormwater issues? Is it like, what is, I guess
I see your question. So I believe that Cape Canaveral is implementing a more regional scale project like you're describing, using some of that funding. So it can be very localized and specific, or sometimes it addresses larger
like
areas.
a broader area? Okay,
Yeah.
so there's not like a cap, it's not specifically for just critical assets. It could be, if there's broad use for those funds if they're awarded.
Yeah, a lot of times the critical assets are impacted, and that's why the grant funding is, right. So it's the road, it's the wastewater infrastructure under the
Okay.
road. There's a lot of critical assets that can be found in a regional area.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, and Dr. Soto just brought up, DEP is not the only grant. There are many other grants for water quality and other implementation type grants. It's just that this particular assessment is required to receive those other grants, but this could make a case that the town could, say, hey, we identified that there are these risks. We need to seek out additional grant funding as well. Oh, sure.
I understand sometimes with these grants, if there's more than one jurisdiction that works together like a stretch, that sometimes you have a better chance. So we've got 10 miles south of us, of county, but there are 2 or 3 neighborhoods that are physically pretty connected to us. Is there any, like, do we coordinate at all with the county? Have they updated for that section? Have they done their part?
Yes, so this particular grant that's funding this vulnerability assessment is a collaborative. Brevard County is doing a vulnerability assessment of all of the unincorporated areas. And then we have Melbourne Beach, we have Indialantic as well are participating. And then we have City of Rockledge, City of West Melbourne, and then 4 other cities throughout the county. So yes, you are correct that when there's collaborative efforts, it does seem that sometimes DEP likes to fund those. Now, I'm not sure about any particular project you're talking about. It may be difficult with your own, allocation of funding, but yes, I have seen those regional level projects get funded before.
How many meetings would there be? Public meetings?
For the town? So this, in our scope with the county, so we're working as an extension of Brevard County. We have 2 for the town of Melbourne Beach. This is one. And there may be another one near the end to report the results is probably what's going to happen.
Are there any, like, as the process goes, is there any work product or like a website where you can kind of see what's done so far, or?
So I can tell you about the deliverables that we'll be giving to the town. I'm not sure how the town plans to distribute the deliverables, but I think this week probably or next week we'll be delivering to the town the gap analysis and asset inventory memo. So that'll outline everything that we described today and have a full list of all those assets. And then the final exposure and sensitivity analysis in the final VA report will be released by June. So Lisa, do you guys plan to make these available on your city website? Or how do you plan to distribute them?
We absolutely could. I was waiting for you to give me something.
Okay, sounds like they will be available.
And, I think what we've already supplied through the staff and those maps, making that available on the website in its own little folder, if you will, may bring the community in as far as, well, what about this? Well, what about that? So I think that could help us.
Will this presentation be available?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Ms. Mackel?
Sure.
Thank you so much. It was a great presentation. In the old vulnerability plan went into great detail about if we got hit by a great hurricane storm, greater than Category 1, and what agencies we would work with to try and rebuild our town if we got hit with a catastrophic storm. Will that be discussed in this as well?
Lisa? No?
Not at all?
No, that is not included in the scope as far as what we've been scoped to do for Brevard County.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it would have changed very much.
Probably didn't change.
Yeah,
Just take that one.
yeah.
That's all you need to know. Not where everything's gonna flood, just who to call. Who are you gonna call? Are we gonna do the exercise?
Sure.
Do you
Yes.
have a slide?
So if there's no more questions, there is no slide for that, but I can walk everybody through it. So one of the really exciting things that we wanted to receive the community's input on is where you are seeing or experiencing flooding or any climate change related issues right now. So we have a couple, do you have a question?
Yeah, that was my next question before you went into this. We had 6 inches of rain last week.
Okay.
We had 3 feet of water outside our front door. 3 feet from our shot elevation. I know it's 3 feet. We had the same problem last year. I thought this was kind of be a meeting that had something to do with that. But since you're asking, yes, we have a problem. And if it hadn't stopped raining, luckily, this is my neighbor, luckily, my house sits a little bit higher than everybody else's. So the water would run past my house and probably through my pool and into Oak. However, we have 3 feet of standing water in the front of our house last week. 3 feet. That's kind of crazy. And luckily, we're all standing there, him and the other neighbor are out pulling manhole covers to try to get it to drain. Well, it's not going to drain. I mean, it'll help a little bit, but it's not going anywhere. So we need to find out, and that was right by where the church parking lot is. And that's where Brevard County comes and dumps into, from what I understand, our storm system, which is overloading our storm system before it gets to the river, which makes us a catch-all for water. So, I mean,
Okay.
why are our houses this is where everybody drains into is our front yard. And nobody has done anything, I mean, I'm not, have been there as long as these guys have, but I hear the stories.
Yeah.
That needs to be addressed before anything else, I think, in this city, is 3 feet of standing water on 6 inches of rain. 3 feet.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you're in a low-lying area, and it sounds like you have an issue for sure. Lisa, do you know if the town has anything planned for that
Yes,
area?
this is called Basin 10, and it's Cedar Lane, and we're all on top of it right now, because Tom and I were out there after the flood, after the rain, and this street was definitely affected. Thankfully, no structures were affected at this point, but it's getting too close for comfort. So we are on top of it. I have the engineer coming tomorrow, and I'm meeting with the former engineers next week. And we believe we understand what's going on in that area. But this is just a, I want to say, kind of a result from before, but when these vulnerability assessments are done, they look at the topography, they look at where the assets are, and they do look at category storms. So in these category storms, they will whip up so much wind speed, but also they anticipate and will show the different flood levels, and then this will show you in our town. In this report, it was saying that the fire department would be affected in like 2100. I venture a guess this new study will show it'll be affected much sooner, right? And so that's how we start preparing. These studies that are being done in accordance with state statute are helping us to prepare for the future, as Kelsey has been stating, through our CRP plan, through our budgeting process. Hey, we need to start looking at these structures and trying to harden them in anticipation of these future catastrophic storms, right? What we're talking about in Basin 10 has risen to the top of, well, management's priorities and is being discussed with the commission individually. So that is something we are on top of. I know it's been unfortunately ignored in the past, but it is rising to the top and has risen to the top because of the flooding it's too close for comfort. Thankfully, again, no structures get flooded yet, but that is what this is saying and will show us moving forward into the future. Does that help understand why we're doing this? This was an opportunistic thing, which is very good for us as we move into our budget planning.
Yeah. Yeah.
I understand because I work insurance claims. I understand storm surge, when you have storm surge, there's really not a lot you can do with it when you have elevation involved. But storm water is a different issue. Storm surge, that's an act of God, you're not gonna be able to do anything with it. I work hurricanes, I've worked, Ian, I've worked Michael, I've worked Irma, I worked several hurricanes. I understand about storm surge. We're talking about storm water.
So that's exactly what we're looking for feedback on in this exercise that we're going to be doing now. So we have a couple of maps around the room. So there's one here on this easel in the front, and there's one on that table kind of off to the side of you guys. So any situations that you've seen, such as what's been described, or maybe not as severe, maybe you've just noticed some smaller scale flooding, we'll ask that you grab one of those red markers that we have and just put a dot on the area that you've seen it. And the way that this feedback will be incorporated is when we do this exposure and sensitivity analysis modeling with the VA, we'll use some feedback we received from the town to kind of ground truth that model to make sure, if you guys have been seeing flooding, is our model also showing flooding will or is currently occurring there? Just using that as kind of a basic in feedback from you all. So I think, with that, we'll be around for maybe another 10 minutes, but as Lisa mentioned, there's another meeting starting at 7 right after. So please add your information or your dot to the map. We would really appreciate that feedback, and we'll stick around for any additional questions off to the side.
Thank you all. I also want to say I'm going to look at updating those emergency numbers. I don't know who asked that question, but I think it's a great idea. And since we're doing it for the whole county, probably the same numbers, then we could have this updated list. Good idea. Thank you.